The Aimpoint T-2 is the Mac daddy for which most modern-day inexpensive red dots are based after. The T2 footprint is among one of the most popular, if I had to say, for an enclosed little red dot like this. Everyone has made a T2 knockoff at some point or another.
Pew pew! Pew!
So that means that this thing should be absolutely perfect.
Pew pew! Pew!
There are a few things that we have to talk about though, like the Aimpoint T2 being in military use. That means that out there somewhere,
pew pew,
this thing is in contract with an agency of the military or government somewhere around the world, which means that they can't really modify or change this as technology
pew pew
improves. Unlike many other manufacturers today that don't have to worry about such regulations. So you'll notice that this thing has a little bit more green tint
pew
to the glass than even what you'd find on most Holosun products with a very similar style optic. I'm going to leave this review as short, sweet, and to the point as possible. Not only are we going to be taking a look at, obviously, the Aimpoint T2, but also the 3XC magnifier that comes with it and the Spuhr mount.
pew pew pew.
In total, this entire
Pew pew pew.
optics package would come in around $1,500 plus from EuroOptic or $1,750 plus tax for mile-high shooting. So is it worth that massive price point? This review has been a very long time coming. And fortunately, I had a supporter out there that wanted to send me in his T2 with his 3x magnifier and his wonderful Spuhr mount. As far as what the prices of all of these can break down at, a T2 is $800 by itself. Yes, you could find some cheaper options, and yes, you could find some more expensive options, but they are not what I would consider to be budget friendly. The magnifier that we're going to take a look at very soon comes in around $300 for just the magnifier itself, and the frankly amazing Spuhr mount comes in $465, which sounds like a ton of money, but it's not just an Aimpoint mount, it's an Aimpoint T2 and magnifier mount. It is so good. I'm going to talk about that for a long time. Anyway, the Aimpoint itself, there's not much else to really say about it. You've probably seen either a real Aimpoint T2 at some point or another in your life, or a knockoff, whether it be a Sig Romeo 5, any of the Holosun products, anything you find on Amazon, they're all basically the same. What you won't find, though, is this absolutely fantastic mount combination. This Spuhr mount is without a shadow or question of doubt one of the nicest pieces of mechanical hardware I have ever gotten my hands on for an optic. As you can see, this one features a standard 30mm front tube, so you're kind of limited on what magnifiers you could run in this setup, but it locks up so aggressively, so tightly, and you could just remove it if you don't want to have the magnifier on it. You don't have to worry about fiddling around with proprietary mounts for a red dot. You just disengage the safety and pull out the lug. It's absolutely incredible. I wish I had developed this and designed it and patented it, because I'd probably be rich by now and I would just give them away to people, but that's never going to happen. One thing about the T2s that always frustrated me was the fact that if you wanted to adjust the windage or the elevation, you had to have a special little tool. Fortunately, the special little tool comes on their caps, but if you lose a cap or it gets damaged, you can't really make any adjustments to your windage or elevation. Not unless you have a pair of needle nose pliers or maybe two 5.56 rounds that you could just wedge in there and try to twist. I'd much rather just a coin slot, whether it's for a flathead screwdriver or a shell casing or a cap like we have here. It just makes more sense to me, but this is what Aimpoint decided was a better choice. Underneath the cap, you will see how the elevation or windage is changed in which direction, so that's at least nice. But again, if you lose the cap, you're going to have to play around with that because it's printed on the bottom side of the cap. As far as how the turrets themselves sound and feel, they're adequate. They have a good positive click, and you could feel it as you adjust it, but you're more or less going to go off the sound of it, not the feel. One nice thing that makes the RDS as nice as it is its overall size. It's very small and compact. Even with the rheostat protruding from the side, it's still pretty slim. Comparing it to a lead and steel LP1, you could see it is half the size, at least. Granted, the LP1 at least has a mount already included with it. You can run any sort of mount for T2 that you want, low, high, offset, cant, whatever. But it's also extremely lightweight, just over 7.6 ounces with the Spuhr mount. Naked, they run just under 4 ounces, which is pretty damn impressive. Talking about the rheostat, the adjustment knob on this is pretty interesting. I'm not going to say I like it. I usually like rheostats a lot, but in this case, I feel like it could use some improvements. If you don't like rheostats, don't worry. Aimpoint does offer the Duty RDS, which has push buttons to make your illumination changes, which I actually think I might like for this setup because it makes it that much smaller. The first thing I'd like to see different about this rheostat is that there's only one off position. At least if they had an off position at the minimum where it is and on the maximum, then you'd be able to shut it off, then put it to your maximum and actually use the damn thing. Another thing is that it just doesn't have any real feel to it. The D10s almost feel like they're non-existent, and it really doesn't fill you full of confidence that you're making a actual adjustment to it. The knurling on the knob itself is exceptional. It's very deep and very sharp and allows very good purchase on it. This aftermarket Knights Armament battery compartment allows you to run a second CR2032 battery in there. So this way, if your battery does die, you at least have one on the ready basically whenever you need it. That little piece of paper is in there so this way the batteries don't accidentally ground out and then, put way too much voltage going through the system. Popping the standard CR2032 battery out of those 6 fingers that hold it in, look at the dimples on that board on the bottom. It is interesting, to say the least. Putting the battery back in is a cinch, and those fingers really lock that battery in very securely. Let's now take a real quick look at the Magnifier. For around $300, you'd expect this thing to be pretty solid, and you know what? It's got some good things going for it, mostly the name, and the 30mm front tube, which allows it to fit inside this mount wonderfully. It also has 4 screws on the bottom, which looks like it's for another proprietary mount, but in this configuration, it's just about as good as it's going to get. There are 2 little grub screws to adjust your windage and your elevation. There is that rubberized sock on the outside to keep it, kind of, sort of clean and not broken. But overall, I don't really feel that this is an amazing magnifier. The eyepiece itself is one area that I know this thing is seriously lacking in. Now, I don't know how old this thing is. I don't know how much wear and tear it's seen, but it did not really fill me full of joy or confidence. Unscrewing the eyepiece all the way out, it is very cheap feeling. It feels like it's a little piece of plastic that's going to just break on you at any time. It's also got a massive amount of wiggle to it. It's probably the worst I've seen as far as a magnifier goes. It really just does not feel like it's worth $300. Optically as well, it's definitely on the lacking side. For me, personally, I'd rather spend $100 on the Primary Arms Gen 4 LER 3X, but that's just me. But, I think you would too if you got behind this magnifier for any length of time. As far as the weight goes as a kit with the Spuhr mount attachment, it's just under 10 ounces, which isn't terrible, but it's still just a lackluster magnifier. Comparing it against the HM3X, yes, the HM3X could be a little bit heavier at 11 ounces. It's a little bit larger of a magnifier, and the mount is substantially heavier by itself. So that's where most of the weight difference comes in from. For this entire setup, I have to say that the Spuhr mount is by far and away my favorite piece of equipment in this setup. The T2 is fine so far, at least physically. It definitely feels pretty substantial and pretty small and pretty light. But the magnifier isn't really all that up to snuff, as you will soon see. But the Spuhr mount, oh my goodness. If you want to run a T2 based optic and a 3x magnifier that bolts on a 30 millimeter tube like this, it is undoubtedly the most impressive mount I have ever gotten my hands on. I love it. The T2 in and of itself, if you've never been behind one, has a fairly small tube, and as a result, the view through it isn't all that large. But again, this being a very small optic, you can't really expect much more than what it offers. I would think that I would prefer looking through the RDS or the Duty RDS only because the battery compartment won't be so large sticking off the 3 o'clock position, but that's just the way it is. When the illumination is way too bright on this thing, or even just right, you can see a big red ring on the outside of the glass. That is something that I've noticed in almost all lighting environments with this thing. As far as the dot itself, it can be sharp, clear, and crisp, but again, bringing it too high up in the brightness setting, you'll actually start to see some reflections off the PCB board. I don't know how old this optic is. I don't know if they have made any tweaks or changes to it, but it's something that I have noticed. As far as the glass itself, there is a very mild green tint to it. This is pretty common with older optics because the green tint helps the dot appear and thus requires less energy for the emitter to make the dot appear. So it should prolong your battery life. And speaking of battery life, 50,000 hours. That's about 5 years at setting number 8, leaving it on nonstop. So yes, there is some tint, but that battery life on a single CR2032 it's hard to wrap my head around. It's really, really hard. Talking quickly now about the 3x magnifier, there is a massive amount of scope body to be seen. And when I try to adjust the elevation to bring the red dot to the center, you can see we have a very aggressive shadow creeping in at the 6 o'clock position. Adjusting the windage yields the same result, going slightly off center, and we have a very aggressive shadow. Now, this does happen on most magnifiers, but with this, it should be a little bit more forgiving than what it is. But the amount of optic body that we see is really bad. Really, really, really bad. And the view through it is very tiny. Let me make it live for you looking through a different magnifier. We are once again behind the Aimpoint T-2, but now I'm going to flip up the primary arms LER Gen 4. This is another 3x magnifier with a 30mm main tube, and very similarly set up to what the Aimpoint magnifier is, but the view through it is much larger, and the scope profile is much smaller. It's not the smallest or the thinnest or the finest that you could find on the market. The Holosun HM3X is a better performer in that regard. The primary arms full-size 3X, which I still haven't finished a review on, that's exceptionally good. Most of the EOTechs, whether it be the G33 or the G45, are better, but this having a 30mm front tube allows it to go into this mount without any issue. Optically, I will say that the primary arms Gen 4 LER 3X magnifier is better than the Aimpoint magnifier, but again, it's that limitations of the 30mm tubes, and in my opinion, it's better than what this is. This is, again, the Aimpoint 3X by itself, no optic in front, and as you could very clearly tell, that is a tiny little view looking through it, and a massive amount of scope body. And the image, it looks acceptable, but it doesn't even look like it's a 3x magnification because of how small it is. Color-wise, it's pretty solid. Flatness-wise, it's also pretty solid, but it just doesn't feel like it is as good as a 3x really should be. If you want a pretty solid 3x that's small and light, the Trijicon 3x that has no name is about as good as you could possibly get. As far as how this thing does magnify optics, we are now going to throw some red dots in front of this to showcase that it can do a decent enough job, but it just has so many shortcomings as an overall package. Throwing the LP1 from Lead and Steel in front of it, it's a good looking image. Good enough to be usable, but as far as extracting maximum performance out of it, the Aimpoint does not provide enough of everything, really, to be good enough. To add a little bit more insult to injury against the Aimpoint Magnifier, we're now going to look through the Holosun HM3X. This being now a sub $200 magnifier, for the price, optically, this thing is vastly superior in most cases to the Aimpoint. The view through it is significantly larger, so it actually makes it appear like we're zoomed in 3x on the glass. The scope profile itself, or the body that we see, is very, very small. It's a wonderful, wonderful performing, very inexpensive magnifier. The only real issue, this has a proprietary footprint, so you can't even run a standard 2-bolt clamp on it to run on any sort of style of magnifying mount. You can get the Unity FTC now with the HM3X footprint, but if you're going to go that route, as good as the HM3X is, if you're going to spend more money on a mount than the optic itself, maybe look at getting, a G33 if you want to really take advantage of it. Or if you're on the fence, one of my friends just bought a G45 to replace his G33 at my recommendation, and he's like, I wish I did this sooner. Spotting shots at 400 or 500 yards of that thing is a cinch compared to the G33, because sometimes a little bit more magnification does go a long way. Putting the LP1 back in front of the HM3X, you can see this is a terrific looking performance. For a budget setup, I'd much rather have the HM3X as opposed to the Aimpoint magnifier. The passive night vision performance of the T2 is almost legendary at this point. It was one of the first real optics to allow such competent and confidence-inspiring shooting through nods, so I had to test it out. As you can see, when the brightness is still a little bit too high, we have that ghost ring on the outside of the lens like we saw earlier, and that is something that is unfortunately going to be there unless you're running a much lower brightness setting. Now, I do have my Gen 7 PVS 14 in this set, so the focus is at my target distance, which is very close, so that's why the dot's not going to appear as sharp as possible, because ideally you want to be set at infinity and the dot should just work. I removed the scope caps to showcase that the body of the optic will more or less disappear, and what's left is a very good looking image. Very little distortion as far as shifting goes. The dot, even though it's not as fine as it has been previously, it's still sharp and clear, just a little bit larger, again because my PVS 14 is set to a much closer focal length. Playing around with the T2 in my basement was awesome. I didn't know what to really expect from this thing, but boy howdy is it really solid. There's a reason why it's so popular, and it's been such a popular optic for as long as it has, and I could really start to understand by just how good of a small package this thing really is. But I wanted to test it out a little bit more with night vision, so let's look at my backyard. With the focal length on my PVS 14 now set to infinity, we're just going to look through my backyard on a very clear, starry night to see what kind of performance we can expect from this thing at greater distances. A bunch of people in some night vision matches that I've gone to recently have passively aimed through their Aimpoint T2s, and they performed extremely well. And just look at this thing. Yeah, there's a little bit of this weird light reflection that was coming off the side of my house, and I couldn't really do much about it. So there's going to be a little bit of a weird shadow going on. But as far as the dot itself, it is small, it is precise, it is perfect. The glass does darken the image a little bit, but if you are running an IR illuminator, this should not be an issue. Look at how dim and sharp and clear that dot can be at lower brightness settings. It is insanely, insanely good. It's such a perfect little fine aiming point that I really couldn't imagine this being much better than how this thing is. When I was buying my first night vision optic to put on my fighting rifle, I ended up going with the EOTech EXPS3. And the reason for that was I liked the larger window, and I like its just overall footprint and design. I enjoy running a larger window on most of my optics, whether it be a magnified optic where it has a large view looking through it, or like this, an EOTech EXPS3 versus an Aimpoint T2. I think the T2 performs a little bit better when it comes to the overall dot sharpness and clarity, even though the EXPS3 is no slouch. But the EXPS3 definitely has less shift to the image when looking through it. Brightness also appears to be a little bit brighter to my eye. I have successfully used this combination of night vision and EXPS3 at extended distances, out to 400 meters, and had very good success without using any sort of IR illumination or laser. Both the T2 and the EXPS3, though, perform wonderfully under night vision. So there isn't really much else I can say. This thing has been around for an extremely long time, and it has spawned a plethora of different knockoffs, some of which are really high quality, some of which are really, really cheap, but all of them pay homage to this optic. And I get it. I really, really get it. The size, the weight, the battery life, the durability, the fact these are made in Sweden, all of those things culminate to an optic that is battle tested. It's been around military organizations for decades at this point. And what's not to love about it? Sure, there are a couple things that maybe I'd like to see a little bit different, like the rheostat for the illumination control, but a duty RDS solves most of those problems. The size and the weight is really what gets me. It's so small and so light that you could almost fit it anywhere. I've seen people with a T2 on a pistol, and it's a little excessive, I would say, but you could still do that and not really add that much weight in for most pistols. But if you're looking to have a heavy pistol, then that's the way to go. If I was to run just a T2 and not even magnify it, I'd still be really happy with it. Yes, there's a little bit more color tint than I personally prefer, but optically it's been solid. The dot is so sharp and clear. The battery life is just insane. And the fact that you could use it so well into passive night vision is just, well, it's the cherry on top. Even when you put a cheapish, shitty-ish magnifier like this Aimpoint 3X behind it, it still has a terrific looking image. But as you could see right there around the center dot, you can see the reflection of the PCB board looking back. Either which way, whether you love it or you hate it, you have to respect it, because this thing is basically as old as time itself. And with that, a huge thank you to the individual that sent this in for me to review. I wanted to get this review out literally 8 months ago, but life is life, and life can be tough sometimes. Anyway, a huge thank you to him, and a huge thank you for all of you for staying tuned. As always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you can still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.